I started off as a journalist. That's what I studied to be in Auckland. And then I went overseas very early on, almost as soon as I could. And I was in Australia for a short time. And then I ended up in Singapore, and I was in publishing. And I was in publishing, and then I started my own business. But I always knew that I wanted to do something to do with film. There was just always something in me that I knew that I wanted to do. So as soon as, but of course, it was always so expensive to do anything like that, right?
Yeah.
So as soon as the iPhone started having video capabilities on it, I started getting lots of little equipment and lavalier microphones and Steadicams and stuff like that. And I started filming holidays and so on. And of course, that was when too these Macs, they started having the iMovie, so you'd be able to edit. And then at that time, I'd gone from publishing into branding, and I was running a branding agency in Singapore when one of the people that I got to know was a television production house guy. And I said, man, I'd really like to get back into my writing. Can I write a TV show for you guys? And he said, well, write a proposal. We've got one at the moment for National Geographic, which they want a proposal for. Why don't you write one for that? And so I wrote it, and we got it.
Wow.
And that was it.
Isn't that easy? Yeah.
That's incredible. That's very charmed.
The next thing you know,
Wow.
we were making a cooking show up in Korea, and then there was a History Channel show, documentary as well.
Yeah.
But then the real kicker for me came because, you know, it sounds really lucky, and it was, because every other time I tried to write a proposal for National Geographic, we got pushed back until finally we got one, and we got a green light, and I thought, this is it. This is great. And the day before, literally the day before we were supposed to go out on recce, they called up and they pulled the plug on it. And I found out later they'd actually paid the production company some money so that they could take it over, and they split it into 2 shows. And they went for years, if not still going today. But that was what really annoyed me, was my vision, my baby had been taken away from me. So I started going out and making my own films at that point.
So what I get from that is that's quite a defining moment.
Yeah.
It's like a fork in the road, and then you I call it the universe redirecting you.
Yeah. And then later on after that, I was doing a lot of corporate directing and writing for corporate stuff. And I was doing a series for Microsoft when they launched the Microsoft Surface, you know, the MacBook Air killer, they called it. And so we launched that in Korea and Thailand, Singapore, and by doing these shorts that I was making for them. And then I realized I wasn't becoming a millionaire.
Yeah, that's a shocking realization.
So this guy, I met this guy around that time who was an adventurer, and he wanted to row a boat from Singapore to Australia with another guy, and then cycle across Australia, and then row his boat from Australia to New Zealand. He called it rowing from home to home. This guy's name was Grant Rawlinson, and he'd climbed Mount Everest, and he'd done all sorts of things like this. It's called human-powered adventure. And he asked me if I'd like to film it. And I said, I'll think about it. And then I was up in Korea doing this Microsoft Surface job, and I was brushing my teeth one morning, and I looked in the mirror and I thought, maybe, you know, I'm doing this, working for Microsoft at the moment. This is going really good. Maybe I should just do it next time, you know, this documentary. And I looked at myself and I suddenly thought, there won't be a next time. Nobody just decides to do that kind of thing every day.
Like it happens, this happens all the time.
And that was my I'm not a millionaire yet moment. So I thought, that's basically how I ended up doing We Came Here for Freedom, because that was my first film. That was called The Sea Decides.
Right.
And I got that into the Dock Edge Film Festival.
You won some awards for that, yeah?
I won an award for it. And so then by the time we came here, well, when the protest movement started, it just seemed like it just came along, and it was like, that's my next project.
Right. Yeah. It's fascinating because, once again, a defining moment.
Yeah.
And you have this choice, and you either go on like call it a gut instinct, an inkling, a nudge, or you can logically replace it and go, okay, there's pros and cons with everything, but it feels like when you're in a stream or flow, that's where you should go if it feels right.
I definitely think that. I listened to, Rick Rubin, the music producer.
Yeah, right.
He talks about how ideas are floating around above us all. All we need to do as creatives is to put our antenna up and we just catch them as they go past.
Yeah, yep.
And that's what I think happened to me.
Yeah. So we came here for freedom, that idea, or, there was obviously an energy building up over those 2 years before that Freedom Convoy and the Freedom Village all evolved. But what was the first sort of entry point into going, okay, that's my next doco? Was there a call? Was there, a crossing of paths?
There definitely was. Originally, look, just going back to that fact that I lived in Singapore, when I started my first business was in 2003, and it was a publishing business. It was a tourist guidebook. And I decided it was like a little poor man's Lonely Planet sort of thing, DL sized, you could put it in your pocket. And I decided that I was going to publish it once every 3 months, so a quarterly publication. This is going somewhere, don't worry.
I know it is, I can feel it.
And so you'd get quite regular updates then, wouldn't you, quarterly?
Well, quarterly, yeah. It was enough for a tourist publication, and Singapore was a place where people came in for a couple of days on their way to somewhere else, and you put maps in there and stuff, and it was really good. And I spent a lot of time getting ready for this, and I was probably in my mid-20s, I think. Saved up a lot of money to do it, because printing a magazine like that, printing 100,000 copies, it costs a lot of money. And the reason this is relevant is because I started it in April, May, June 2003. That was the first issue, April the 1st. And that is exactly when the SARS epidemic hit Singapore. And I walked around the streets of Singapore then. Of course, you give away your advertising for the first issue.
Yeah.
And then the second issue, you start to try to sell advertising, right?
Yeah.
But I couldn't sell any advertising, so I was basically broke from the word go.
Oh, dude.
And I'll tell you something, it was bollocks. There was no difference. The only difference to Singapore in those days was there were no tourists, because they'd been scared into not coming. I don't remember seeing anyone having died or anything like that. They made a big deal about it, just like they did with this thing that we've just gone through. So when it came here, I just thought, okay, it'll all be over in 3 weeks. 3 weeks to flatten the curve. Just sit it out, Alistair. Don't worry, it's going to be okay. And it never did finish. And I just thought, this is so depressing. And I was going into really dark places. Now, my philosophy with filmmaking is to make films about ordinary people doing extraordinary things, ordinary people who inspire me.
Love it.
And so then when I just saw this depressing thing, I didn't think I wanted to do any kind of filming about this. But then I went out to one day, somebody in Rotorua where I live, they found out that I'd made a film. And so we had this protest march out at Murupara for the doctor out there, Bernard Conlon, and his wife Britta. And they'd been under the cosh from the medical council for questioning the safety of the vaccines. And so I decided, I'll go out there, and you know what? I will take the camera. And I went out there, and look, Murupara has a population of about 1,500 people, and about 1,000 marched in the streets that day.
Whoa.
And then I saw this guy, Rewi Hare, our Freedom and Rights Coalition leader from Rotorua, get up on stage, and he just fired it out, man. It was fire and brimstone on the stage.
Wow.
And I thought, this is an inspiring story about ordinary people marching in the streets, standing up to power, speaking directly to power so powerfully. There was this guy, after I finished filming Rewi that day, I was standing up on the stage, and this guy pulls at my jeans from below, and I look down, and he points at Rewi, and he says, "You make sure that guy gets on YouTube." And he's actually the guy who speaks at the very start of We Came Here for Freedom Part 2.
Yep.
Talking about araha and whakawhanaungatanga and all of that stuff. So yeah, that's where it sort of came from.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I almost feel that, you talk about ordinary people and, there's the hero's journey, right, where people go on that, where something happens in their world and they're tested and they go on this journey. But to cut a long story short, for me, this event, whatever you want to call it, we used to call it the emergency.
Yeah,
Anything other than what the sort of the mainstream were calling it. And people were called, people were activated.
Yeah.
And I know there was a part of me, a warrior aspect, which came out instinctively, and I didn't know where to channel that.
Yep.
Am I going to, we were talking about this before, Steve, did we want to be boots on the ground on the front line, or where's our skill set? How can we make the best influence? And it could be just with your little network around you, with your friends and family, and start there, or it could be a broader audience, or it could be what we do on Reality Hub is get the message out there, and So yeah, that's fascinating. I love that. I love when people are awakened and there's a different energy in a different field, like that in a rising, if you like, which led to obviously a unity and a community that came together.
It was really interesting because when I started doing that, I made a short film about that day, and then I went on and made 3 more. So I made 4 short films about the protest movement before we got to Wellington, before the convoy started.
Right.
And I felt like that was another one of those calling things.
Yeah.
Because it was like I was training for the big event.
Yes.
And I got to know, for instance, how are you gonna make people feel like they're there when you make the film? How do you make people feel like you're there? So you learn to sort of film behind people, so people walk in front of the camera and behind shoulders and all that.
Yeah.
You learn you don't put a drone up, because if you put a drone up, it breaks the connection and you don't feel like you're there anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You do other things like when there's speeches, all those places, they always had a generator. So you had to stay as far away from the generator as possible, because you can't mic everybody up,
Yep.
but you have to stand next to a speaker.
Yeah.
So you got to choose which side of the stage you go to,
Yeah.
Fascinating.
So-
And you mentioned on the phone, if you were to shoot something like this again, you would consider Dolby 5.1. Because in a
Absolutely,
big
I
screen
would.
theatre, you'd be able to be amongst it, in it like you were human with your ears on, listening to all the sounds around you.
I think that's something that I just have to learn to do myself, because it would have been incredible to do that in a theatre. But I'm pretty happy with the way that it does sound when I see it in a theatre.
Dude, brought us to tears.
Yeah.
Yeah. We watched it at the Sylvia Park showing, which was, by all accounts, a stunning place for it to be, because you've been on this tour.
Yeah.
And folks, we have Alistair Harding in the studio with us today, who's a documentary filmmaker, as you might have figured out.
Don't worry, the title of the podcast will
It
explain
should
that.
cover that off, shouldn't it? Yeah. Just in case you randomly just selected it without looking. And you've been on this tour, which caught our attention. Voices for Freedom, I get their emails, and I noticed that they said there's a few more showings to go. And as soon as I got that email, I booked for Rob and I to head along to it. And it was awesome. But you've been around the country with it, and some not so flash places and some really flash places. So it's pretty cool.
I think we've done now, I was counting them in the car on the way here, I think it was about 22 towns and cities and 24 showings, 24 screenings.
And that's despite the fact that you can watch it online.
I thought
People still want to go.
we did 14 places in 14 days before it was launched, and I thought that'll be it.
Right.
But for some reason, people still wanted to do it. And in actual fact, the crowds are getting bigger.
That's incredible.
Every place we've gone so far since it was launched has been sold out, and I just find that incredible, because not only is it such a grassroots thing, but also we don't have any support from the local media. If you were doing this in normal times, you'd get a story in the local newspaper, right,
Yeah.
or on the local radio station or something. But we haven't had any of that. It was Voices for Freedom, just an incredible organisation, kicked it off by just getting their coordinators to organise them. And now we've got people who are not connected to Voices for Freedom asking to do them. And we're about to, at the end of this month, it looks like we're going to go and do about 10 or 11 more down in the South Island as well.
I hear the South Island is pumping. I hear it as that the community of people there have really pulled together. And I don't know if it's a case of the grass is greener, where you hear about something far away and you go, oh, I wish I was there, because I hear that communities are really coming together down there.
I think the whole thing, as we go through it, the one thing that I have realized from this, when you go on a tour like that, you think to begin with it's just about the film. But then you realize that it's something a little bit bigger than that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You stand in the lobby beforehand, and afterwards people know who you are because you've talked, you've done the Q&A and stuff like that. But beforehand, they don't necessarily know who you are. So you can stand in the lobby and just look around and just watch all these smiling faces, these people talking and laughing and being together, enjoying the company of each other. And that's when you realize that it's about bringing people together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm not just talking about a film, I'm talking about humanity,
Yeah.
Well, this is a particularly good film for that example. How, if I could jump to this, how have people changed from how they came together in Wellington to how they come together now at a film, at a showing? Now, there's going to be some obvious sort of answers to that. You're staying the night in Wellington, you're with people, you're fresh out of or in the middle of a pandemic, and now we've got this retrospective view back on it. But what I'm looking at is the perspective of how happy or broken are people right now. Because I think your film provides a therapy for people who are like, oh, this was so important in my life, and I was alone.
Yeah. And I'll let you just ponder on that, because you're absolutely right. We're now post the event. And so I've worked through this as well, because there's the individual and also the collective, what I call trauma that everyone's been through. And there was that focal point at the Freedom Village that created a unity in a community where people could share their feelings, their emotions that were pent up over that time.
Including for people that weren't there, who couldn't go.
Yeah, people that felt isolated. All those emotions were there and just put there. There was there was that sharing, there was that validation, there was that sense of, okay, I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Despite what the narrative was
I think
saying.
that was the number one thing that was said in those weeks, especially at the convoy period. Eh?
Yeah.
I'm not alone.
I'm not alone. I'm not crazy. I questioned the narrative. I knew something didn't add up. All those things, all those those roller coasters of emotions. But now with this, how many, a year and a half later, I suppose what Steve was alluding to was, what's the vibe now? Where are people at? You know, how healed are they? How reconciled are they? And I know it's a big question because it comes down to the individual, but it's just fascinating.
I mean, we must shut up and let you answer this question. But I just saw people in such different states. I just wonder where you're at with it.
I think it's a really difficult question to answer. I haven't thought of that before. But, okay, first of all, I think when we were in Wellington, there was a certain desperation, I think. I remember feeling that myself. I remember feeling when we went down in the convoy, it was kind of like, finally we can out ourselves. We can talk. We can shout. We can make our point known. So there was a kind of in me at least, I feel like there was a little bit of a desperation in that. And I remember the early days of when we arrived in Wellington, there was this feeling of like, right, we're here. Now what do we do? And I remember the second morning after we arrived, that it was a real odd feeling that morning. I remember I stayed off site that night, and I walked in, and it was disquiet. I remember seeing people standing underneath the media balcony there, shouting at the media. I saw other people marching up and down in front of. There were just 4 security guards there at that time, marching up and down with flags around them. And I remember one of the guys giving the fingers and stuff like that. And then people all lined up with their backs to Parliament, and and you see this in part 1 of We Came Here for Freedom. They all put their arms together and they started singing the national anthem, and that's when the police arrived That was the first time. And incidentally, that's my favorite piece of filmmaking ever because I actually captured it, you know.
Yeah.
You see it happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was a real turning point. And so there was this sort of desperation there. So now we come forward a year and a half. And yeah, I think when you take the film around the country, you see people are a lot more calmer now. They're a lot more assured in what they know. We've gone through the stages of grief. And now I think there is that feeling of healing, definitely. There's a lot of people that still feel very, very hurt by what happened to them and the way that they were talked to, the way that they were treated. And so, yeah, I get a lot of thank yous, and I think it's because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just people are glad that finally their voices are being heard. And I always remember when I first arrived down there in Wellington, people would ask me, what are you doing here? Why did you decide to come? And that was my answer, was you pointed up to the balcony and you go, those guys aren't going to tell our story. And in 20 years' time, that footage that they've got from the balcony, that's not going to be able to tell our story either.
No.
Yeah.
So we needed to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. You did something which I believe is something which is a basic human need, is to feel acknowledged,
Yes.
to feel seen, to feel heard, and ultimately to feel like you belong and you're worthy and are loved. But you acknowledged those people that seemed to be unacknowledged, and in particular was so highlighted in the documentary by the powers that be.
I think you've hit the nail on the head there. That's it. That's
And
the
that-
acknowledgement.
And then having that acknowledge touched a tangibleness in a film and scene with ordinary people is such a beautiful thing, you know, because that's what I got, you know. It's like, because you talk about the desperation and yeah, it's in some ways, I suppose, a cathartic and therapeutic documentation for people. As hard as it is also to look back on those events, because I'm sure that would have
Absolutely.
been a challenging and a difficult for a lot of people, but also a brave and courageous thing because they felt that they wanted to do something that they were called to do. They felt they were doing something that was right, and they were doing it for all the right reasons, in my opinion.
Yeah, you've got to remember too, we spent all of that time being gaslit
Yeah.
Yeah.
by media. I always remember, you know, you see in part 2, you see that event where the guy, Phil, gets eye gouged up against the
Yeah.
portaloos.
Yeah. That made me so angry.
And, you know, he came along to the screening in Palmerston North, and I got him up on stage and I asked him, you know, what's happened? And absolutely nothing has happened. But we can talk about that a little bit later if we want. What I was wanting to say, I've forgotten what I was going to say.
You're
I
talking
went off
about
on a tangent, and I
talking about
Well,
being gaslit.
That's
and
right, gaslit. Okay. So when I went and looked for that footage, and you go on YouTube and you look for that footage, and there is a clip from, I believe it must be News Hub or TV3. I don't actually watch mainstream media anymore, so I'm guessing here. And I think it was that Mike McRoberts guy.
Yeah.
And he's standing there in front of a video wall, and that footage of Phil getting eye gouged is playing behind him. And Mike McRoberts is saying, today the protesters attacked the police. It is pure and simple gaslighting. It was, don't believe what you can see with your own eyes. Listen to what I have to say. And so, you know, that acknowledgement thing is really key.
Yeah.
Because that's what we were going through, and it's very easy to forget it. We have to remember. Otherwise, it will happen again.
Does it ever cross your mind when people like that, those memories of Mike McRoberts, or and I struggle to remember the names, but there was someone else who was really pushing the vaccine every night on the project. You know, the smarmy-looking one with the dark hair.
I've never watched that show. I saw one clip
There was
once.
a time when I used to watch the news regularly until I realised it was becoming a poison in my life.
Yeah.
And I let
Yeah.
it go. And I think about how they made fun of people who weren't wanting to take this experimental gene therapy. and how they demonize them. But also, perhaps more importantly, how they falsely convinced a great deal of unsuspecting innocent folk to take it with tools that were fear-based. And does it ever cross your mind about the justice or the injustice or perhaps the one day the realization someone like that might have of, oh God, what have I done?
Those people that were pushing it.
Yeah.
I like to think that we're all even those people are doing something because they believe it's right. But so in that respect, I would expect that one day they will understand what they did, that it was wrong. I mean, it was evil. There's a story which I couldn't put in the film, but I really wish that I had but just timing and rhythm and so on didn't allow it. But if you remember, there's a press conference in there, Voices for Freedom organised, and it had a few victims and injured people and so on talking.
I remember seeing that in part 2, right?
It's in part 2.
Yeah.
And in part 2, there's this woman, her name is Lisa Wellborn, and she's from the New Zealand Health Forum, and you just see a little clip of her saying, there are not sides, there are shades. We need to build a bridge. And she was there at the screening that you guys went to. She spoke for a little bit. But I didn't get to tell the story, I don't think, which was just before that, what she'd said. She'd told this story about how a young woman who was double jabbed up for summer, wearing the mask, everything, had turned up at the protest, and she was beside herself. And the story was that she'd gone to the hospital, and I can't remember the reason she'd gone to the hospital. She was there for an appointment or to visit someone, but I don't think she was sick. And she turned up, and they tested her for the virus that we're all supposed to be so scared of. And she tested positive. And then they turned her away. They said, you can't come in here. I mean, come on, this is a hospital.
Yeah.
But they had put so much pressure on the people of New Zealand with this story that she thought, when she got tested positive, that she literally thought she was going home to die.
Oh, my God.
So she came down. The only place she could think of going to was go down to the protest, and she saw the New Zealand Health Forum tent, and so that's how she ended up talking to Lisa. Right. And Lisa tells the story about how she had to sort of talk her down. And when you think about it like that, you know, we as protesters felt aggrieved in a big way, but think about it from the other side as well. The other side of the equation also had a massive number done on them, to the point where they thought that they were going to die just because they tested positive to something which we all know is basically the flu.
Yeah, massive psyop, I think.
Yeah. And in that respect, you know, these people that we're talking about who were on the news every day doing that, laughing at people for actually asking questions and so on, they've got a massive answer. They have a massive question to answer. But I'm not sure. I think they'll probably just keep trying to wiggle out of it, because I do think too, when you look at the film, we had a journalist come along to the screening in Wanganui, and he watched the whole thing to his credit, and he stayed for the Q&A. And then afterwards, the organizer sent him an email and said, I hope you enjoyed yourself. I hope it wasn't too uncomfortable, you know, and I hope your story reflects your journalistic integrity. Yeah. And he wrote back and he said, actually, I really enjoyed it. I think it's a story that every New Zealander should see.
Wow.
But I'm also part of that side. He helped with the vaccine rollout. So when his story came out, it was in the River City Press. It was basically a justification for everything that they'd done. And then at the end of it, he said, but this is a good film. You can watch it at wecamehereforfreedom.com.
Right.
So that was good, but I get the feeling that what actually happened there was he saw himself in the mirror and he had to justify himself.
Yeah.
And I think we'll probably see a lot of that happen.
Well, I often think about thalidomide.
Yeah.
No one ever really apologized for that.
Yeah.
That I'm aware of. And perhaps the only outcome that was justice was I can only assume that in some parts of the world, People sued for false representation of a drug to stop morning sickness. But do we ever get an apology? Do we ever get anyone saying, "Oh no, this should never have happened"? All we get is withdrawal of the product.
Look at what's happened in the United States with the opioid crisis. I remember trying to talk to somebody about this from the other side of the argument, and I brought this up as an example, and I said, there's been 500,000 deaths from fentanyl being pushed through legitimate means, through doctors and so on. And I said, any other time in history that'll be known as genocide. And so the guy goes, "Oh, just prove it to me." So I pulled up a story and I go, "Oh, sorry, I got the number wrong. It's actually 600,000." And he's going, how do you define a death? It's we're talking about the same companies.
Well,
We're talking about the same companies that pushed this experimental injection on everybody as well. Why isn't this a discussion? I don't know. I don't understand that.
It boggles my mind all the time, and my mind's going to so many different layers and levels. But you're right. What we talk about a lot on Reality Hub is, what's your belief system like? What's your societal programming like? What's your cultural programming like? And I think what we're seeing, what I'm seeing is that the mainstream media narrative, it's just been exposed. We know that they have an agenda. We know that nothing goes on to air unless it's been curated or signed off. So you get a false sense of reality, which has been sort of rammed down our throats or programmed for so long that it's like the fish that don't know they're in the water.
Yeah.
And so you wake up and go, "Oh, I'm in the water." So it's like an awakening, epiphany. And then, I remember, I think it was during your documentary and I was doing the same, where you're watching someone live streaming and then you may be watching the news interpretation and it was completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if anyone who's awake enough or aware have seen that through all forms of media, during election processes, everything. So they've basically dictated how we perceive reality, how we think, how we're supposed to act, feel, etc., unless you can see through it and question it. And that's the problem, is that when you do question the narrative, you get what we're seeing, happening, silenced.
Well,
It's
there's no wonder
you're a conspiracist.
so many social media accounts were deleted at that time because it was
censorship
showing the truth, wasn't it?
Yeah. I remember being down there in Wellington, and because I'm from the media originally, I'm addicted to it as well. I'd listen to it and I watch it and I read it, and I could not believe the only thing they seemed to get right was that we were there. It was incredible how much they lied. I never thought that was a massive awakening for me.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. To me, it's kind of like the media now, all those narratives that go through it. To me, the way I see it, it's like we're in this prison camp. Yeah. And that's those stories, the media, the stories, the narratives that they do, that's the barbed wire. And it's actually not that hard to get through the barbed wire, but then you've got these snipers up there in the guard towers who, as soon as you try and get outside the wire and you start leaving it behind, they start, shooting at you, saying you're racist, Islamophobe, extremist, whatever, and they're expecting you to run back inside the wire. That's kind of how I see it now.
Great analogy.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Can you speak to the kinds of people that were at the protest for me? So I didn't go, right? I couldn't go, and I had responsibilities here, but I attended various protests around town, and I did what I could do. And then I saw, I guess, a certain kind of person head down. And what I'm looking for here is a reflection from your perspective of the kind of person that goes down. Maybe it's something that they've lived in their life that allows them to have a healthy distrust of authority. But then they were painted out, if you wouldn't mind talking to us about the river of filth, those horrible people that are there. They were painted as though there was something you couldn't relate to. I had a friend refer to them as the ferals, And and I guess if someone was listening to this who was open-minded enough to listen to this podcast but weren't already on this side of perspective that the three of us share, how different to your average working professional was the protester?
No different. I answered it. There you go.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Well-
but maybe.
Well,
Alistair?
Well, I think when I think about that, what you're asking is, what's the thread that holds everybody together? What's the one common thing? Because it was people from every walk of life, every strata of society. There were lawyers there, i.e. Sue Gray,
Yeah.
highly educated woman, all the way down to people who there was Laura and Tapo. Laura's the naked girl who got pulled out of the line on Thursday the 10th.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she was all oiled up and she was naked. She was one of the Arahata 7, one of the 7 women who ended up in the Arahata prison for being arrested that day.
Yeah, didn't pay the bail and
Yeah.
No one signed anything, and it was
No
the best
one
move
signed.
ever.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's solidarity, yeah.
And I think we should talk about that solidarity because that's a really great story for that. But, so her and her boyfriend, Tapo, they're basically full-time protesters. I don't know the full backstory with them, but my understanding is that they've been involved with this stuff for many, many years, and that's what they do. So, yeah, the answer being what is the string that strung everybody together?
Sure.
Right, because that's a vast contrast between full-time activists and lawyers.
Yeah.
And a lawyer who has a background in science. I think that what it was if you it's a really hard one to I was very disappointed in my community where I came from. I came from originally I was brought up in Auckland. I went to Auckland Grammar School. I had a lot of friends who were doctors and lawyers and well-educated people, university professors and so on. People who are so-called, people might call them privileged or someone might call them, well-educated. And I always found that the more educated you were, the less likely you were actually to be in Wellington.
The more programmed you were.
But that's a really cruel way of saying it because,
It is.
No, but
because
it's an observation,
It's
isn't
an
it?
observation.
But the people that were there were very much in touch with who they were and what their purpose was in life. And I think that so that takes away that thing because there were very educated people there. It's an attachment and not a knowledge of what your purpose is in life that actually gives you the freedom to say, oh, no, that's wrong. Because if you are so worried, if you don't really know what your purpose is and you spend your life in a grey cubicled office and so on, doing things that you don't necessarily want to do, that becomes something that I always believe that the reason it was so successful was because they gave us an existential threat. And if you don't have a purpose in life, then suddenly you go, oh, okay, I've got something something important to live for now, to fight for now. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense.
I totally understand. If I can sort of add my input there, I think as a society, we're very quick at labeling things.
Yeah.
Certain type of demographic goes to a particular concert, or a certain type of person's going to go down to that protest, and it's going to and then the media can jump on that and then paint it in a certain way. See, I told you, they're all this. They're all anti-this. They're all. But that's completely wrong. It could be your neighbor. It could be your best friend going down. It could be someone who really supports them but is afraid of how they're going to be perceived because I'm going to go back to work and go, oh, you went down there, you supported. So there's this divisive culture. And what you're saying, Alistair, is these people are connected to a purpose. They're connected to their heart. They're connected to something within them that they maybe can't even define, but they know it's right.
Well, I'm hearing Alistair say they know themselves.
Yeah, they know themselves.
Yeah.
Whereas, obviously, the way I look at it, and it's my observation, is they're the people that are system and programmed that are in that sort of consciousness level that are sort of disconnected to that, and they don't want, for whatever reason, they're not open to seeing or feeling or at least being curious as to going, hang on a minute, why are they down there?
Well, at the end of the day, fear is the product here. It's not an injection. It was fear,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
And so if you are worried about losing your job, you have fear that you're going to lose your job. But if you're happy within yourself and you know what your purpose is in life, you know that a job does not define you,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? You don't have that to lose. And that's how certainly I feel about it. When I first started my first business, I always remember lying in bed awake at night, really worried about where my next check was going to come from, because suddenly I didn't have a paycheck coming in.
Yeah.
But I've learned to live with that over the years, and maybe that's why I ended up being there. That's kind of my theory anyway.
Yeah, no, that's a very valid point. That is existentialism, threat, survival, and the fear.
Did you have anything occur in your time as a schoolboy that made you think, and I'm just clutching at straws here, I'm hallucinating, but you might have had a similar experience to me. I also went to a boys' school.
Yeah.
Dilworth, as it happened.
I lived across the road from Dilworth.
Yeah, right. So we're, and how old are you?
47.
That's right. You mentioned, so we're the same age. I'm 48. So, hang on. I'm turning 48 at the end of the year. Oh, how the time has affected one's mind. But, okay, we're of a similar generation. Both went to a boarding school. Both went to a boys' school. Mine happened to be a boarding school. And there was a lot there that I didn't like, and a lot that I learned from social pressure, which taught me ultimately, in summary, that when you get past what people think of you, you can be truly free.
Yeah.
And I had some awful experiences that led me to that conclusion, which gave me the strength to not go with the flow of what everyone else was doing.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything there for you?
I think exactly the same experience, really. I mean, I had a vast array of different types of friends at school, ones that you couldn't hang out with together. So I'd go from group to group to group.
Yeah.
But also some really nasty experiences too, where, you're made to feel outside the loop, so to speak, or whatever.
Yeah.
But I don't know if those were the things which made me end up in Wellington, because for most of my life, for all of my life, I've been a rule follower, Right.
A good upstanding citizen.
Yeah,
doing the right things.
I've done all, and until this all kicked off, this madness that I call it the madness, kicked off, I was fully on board with it all. Those are the rules. This is what you do.
Yeah.
And so it's been a massive changing thing for me to actually go against the authority.
Well, there's that question that you pose, I think, at the beginning of, is it part one? What would you stand up for?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where my starting point became, right? Is when I wrote that, it was, how do we talk to the people on the other side? How are we going to get them to listen to our side of the story? Our side of the story has been silenced. It has been ignored by the government. It has been slandered by the media, and then it's been attacked literally, physically by the police. How are we going to talk to these people? What's our starting point? So what would they stand up for? To me, I found the place where I would stand up through that. One day they're all going to have to answer that question, because once we start down this track of tyranny, once we start down this track of silencing people by calling, you're racist, or you're an Islamophobe, you're not allowed to speak, at some point you're going to have to answer the question. You're going to come up to that line, and you're going to have to get the bravery to stand over, to walk over the line, and go past that wire fence.
Yeah.
And so that's where that came from at the start of part one. What would you stand up for? What would make you do this?
I would have thought that for the people for whom this wasn't a thing that would make them stand up, is they're not thinking about the erosion of their own democracy and freedoms. Maybe what they would stand up for is the preservation of their children. But then we're seeing more and more the things that are being shoved at kids these days. An entirely different topic, but it's a form of tyranny too.
Absolutely. I always remember just before the convoy, the biggest turning point for me in all of this was just before the convoy. And it was when they rolled out the injections for all the kids.
Right.
And I remember doing the pop-ups on the side of the road with Voices for Freedom.
Yeah.
And I remember distinctly, we suddenly started getting thumbs up and toots. And we were standing outside the Rotorua Hospital, and people came out from the hospital to stand up at the top of the hill, and I looked up at them, and a few of them were like clapping.
Wow. Medical professionals? Yeah.
Medical professionals. And then I remember seeing a couple of ambulances come past and give us the thumbs up. They knew that was the line for a lot of people. Kids.
I was at a protest in the region here that had a meatworks, and it was outside the meatworks because they were going to force that upon their staff. And out came these people, and we thought, uh-oh, here's someone to tell us to F off, you know?
Yep.
And it was the health and safety guy. And he was sort of representative of that sort of authority that could tell people to get off our land and don't do this, and, you know, this is our own business. And he wanted instead to give everyone a reflective jacket so they would be safe. I've got these free yellow and pink high-vis jackets, and we just want to make sure that you can protest safely. And by the way, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah, isn't that amazing? Yeah.
See, that's what gives me the most hope, is that you see those things happen, and you know that in the end, the weight of numbers will. Sure, it was a lot of people fell for it, but when push comes to shove, I pretty much think that we've got weight of numbers. We will have the weight of numbers.
I think that's true.
Yeah, I feel that as well. And you can't blame the people that fell for it, because
they spent billions of dollars advertising to those people, propagandizing
when you
them.
understand the mechanics at play and the psychology and just that mass psyop, which we've talked about a lot.
Yeah.
You can't blame people, and you can't blame people that, and you know, there's no judgment surrounding sticking to the rules. We need rules. We need guidelines. We need that in life for sure. Yep. But when it starts to encroach on personal freedoms and body autonomy and things, and it's like that, you know, where's that threshold? You know, what is that hill you're willing to die on, or at least having a voice, at least speaking up, saying, this is how I feel.
It's incredibly powerful, to empowering to know where that hill is too, eh?
Yeah. And you're right. It was a complete fear program, and you know what does fear do? It constricts you. You know, you don't want to go out. You don't want to.
Do you remember?
It does crazy things.
You remember coming to the baby shower, Rob?
Yeah.
And,
yes.
And there was someone there who I won't name, and they're quite obviously they're our baby shower, so they're quite important to us. But it was the first time they'd left the house.
I remember.
Other than the supermarket or no, sorry, they got things delivered. It was really the first time they had met in public with other people, and it was at the back of our mother-in-law's place, where, you know, there was a baby shower, and we were seated outside on a nice sunny day under an awning having a drink, and she arrived with her mask and took it off sheepishly and looked around and went, I haven't actually been out in a year or two, or whatever it was.
I know.
And I really felt for her, because her reality's different. It's what you're describing, this psychological operation that had people living in fear. And I often reflect on, and I've said this before, so I'll say it briefly, how someone that I thought was like me would view the world like me. But didn't, and went for it with all of the vaccinations and all that stuff. And I'm just so glad that she's healthy, apparently. I'm so glad she's not one of the people who are injured. The last podcast, no, well, not the last. I think you've done a reality bite since Barry,
our last
haven't you?
guest.
Well, we have our last guest, Barry, who you might have seen, because he's also had some exposure with Liz Gunn on Free NZ. You know, he took the vaccine and is now constantly, his arm is constantly shaking, and he's got heart issues and all kinds of things, and serological tests have shown that he has spike proteins in the order of thousands per millimole, whereas a normal person has just several, and it's tremendously affected his health. And he was a competitive bodybuilder and a well-known actor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know who that is. Yeah.
Yeah.
A healthy, fit guy.
And guys like him were turning up and were in your film. And I watched some of the people in part 2 who were affected, and they just reminded me of Barry, our friend Barry. And I looked at the way they shook and had those sort of agitations and the sort of the MS-like symptoms that suddenly turn up following the vaccine.
Look, that's why we have to have these discussions, because in the end, it's about they've made mistakes. They made mistakes, but they're human. They can make mistakes. But the problem is that they set it up by denying freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is so important. I remember...
And freedom of choice.
And freedom of choice. But this conversation about freedom of speech is really big right now here in New Zealand, and all over the Western world they're talking about this. And they're talking about misinformation and disinformation, and they're talking about, some speech is less equal than others, and so on.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I remember very early on talking to a client on the phone, and he said that to me. He said, I believe in freedom of speech, but only to a point. And now when I started in journalism in 1998, I think it was, I was in the newsroom in a newspaper in South Auckland. And I remember being dismayed or disgusted with somebody that was quoted in the newspaper. And so I talked to one of the senior journalists who'd been around for a while, and I said, why are we letting this person say this disgusting stuff? And she turned around and she quoted Voltaire. She said, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I will defend with my life your right to say it.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was it. That was freedom of speech. That's the importance of it. But when this guy said this to me at the beginning of the madness, I said this to him, but I didn't really understand it.
Huh.
And this whole thing has taught me, okay, what is the purpose and the value of freedom of speech? And when you start to when you distill it down, it's the idea of testing ideas. You have idea A and you have idea B, and you test them against each other, and one of them will probably be wrong. Both of them could be wrong even, But we find, as humanity, as a community, as a civilization, we find out the best way forward by testing ideas. That's what freedom of speech is about.
It's also what the scientific
Science.
method
Yeah.
is.
That's
all about.
right.
Yeah.
And when you don't do that, when you take away one of those choices, what was that guy's name you just mentioned, the bodybuilder?
Barry.
This is what happens because Barry didn't have all the information.
No.
This is what happens. Casey Hodgkinson, Rob Martin end up in wheelchairs for the rest of their lives because they didn't have the information.
Yeah.
Rory Nen wanted to go to his wedding.
Yeah.
He didn't have the full information. He ended up going to his own funeral instead.
Yeah.
It's not about... Part of me thinks we've got to just say, look, it's not about a witch hunt. It's about reinvigorating ourselves with the belief, the trust in democracy and the trust in freedom of speech. Because right now we have things like the Disinformation Project and all of that going around trying to push us as a society into a situation where there is an arbitrary regulator who's going to decide what we can talk about and what we can't. And to me, the last 3 years has just shown us what a disaster that will be.
Can you tell us more about that? 'Cause that's actually something I'm not.
The Disinformation Project.
No, yeah, please. Tell me about that.
So it was set up. It's run by a woman called Kate Hanna. I think there's 3 people involved. There's another guy called Sanjana Hatatuya. He's originally from, I'm sorry, I've forgotten whether it's Sri Lanka or Bangladesh. It's one of those two.
Uh-huh.
And then there's another woman who I can't remember her name, but the main one is Kate Hanna. And it was set up by the Prime Minister's office in I think it was February 2020. So think about that. What else happened in February 2020?
Oh, let me guess.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's incredibly suspicious. why would they have known? Because, sorry, the reason they set it up, they say, is to counter disinformation. Now, why would they have known in February 2020 that there was going to be a problem with disinformation? That to me is just
starting about 1 month later. Yeah.
Right? So they've set it up, and basically they write reports every now and then that they get quoted in the news. And there was a really interesting situation. To give you an idea of how they go about their work, they wrote a report recently, a couple of months back, where they explained how anti-mandate protesters have been bridged to transphobic protesters, anti-trans people protesters, okay?
Okay.
They use this word bridged. Now, they use words and they seed these words. So they started saying that hate against the trans community has reached genocidal levels. Now, I'm sorry, but that's not what the word genocide means. People saying nasty things about people. Genocide means you're going and killing people.
Yeah.
So when you think back and you look at the way that they framed the protesters in Wellington,
Totally
how
mischaracterized
they
it.
called us white supremacists. Who are white supremacists? They're Nazis. As soon as that Posey Parker incident happened up in Auckland, at Albert Park, the Disinformation Project reported on that as saying, they're all Nazi sympathizers. So we've gone from white supremacists, bridged them to Nazis. What are Nazis famous for? Holocaust, genocide.
Yeah.
And they're seeding all of this into the nation's media at the same time. It's by making these reports so that then the media can then quote them, which then helps the government pass their hate speech laws.
Right.
That's what I think it's about.
That's fascinating. That's tyranny for sure.
Yeah.
The Posey Parker one that you mentioned, I think, was so powerful because what she achieved in a good way is to say, if I stand here and stand up for women's rights and you squash them and you ridicule me and you throw tomatoes all over me, what we're really seeing is that you're preventing women's rights and freedom of my speech to come and what I think New Zealand needed was a foreigner with a strong sense of freedom of speech and the bravery to do it, because I feel personally that a lot of New Zealanders are absolutely squashed and dumbed down and in fear for not wanting to put their head above the parapet. The tall poppy thing is alive and well, and I know culturally we're really told to get back in our place or you will be exiled from this small little society. And we're small enough that actually has a real effect.
It's really interesting you say that because one of the things which I've noticed is when you look at the doctors who stand up against this.
Oh my God, the bravery.
There's one thing that they all have, most of them have in common, and I'm talking like 95% of them all have foreign accents.
Yeah.
They're not
interesting.
You every time you meet one, you go, "Oh, you're Irish. Oh, you're American."
Yeah.
It makes you question though that how culturally programmed are you? If you're listening to this, just ask yourself how much do you identify with that, and how much, as you say, is seeded by the media and what you've fed.
Well, New
as
Zealand's such a
information.
small place, right?
Yeah, it's like we're cocooned. We're very insular, I would call it, in a lot of ways.
If you step out of line here, you're going to have your neighbour come and have a chat to you. So therefore, you're less likely to step out of line. That's one reason why I think maybe I got involved so early, is because I'd spent 20 years living overseas. I spent half my life at that point living outside the system, and then suddenly I'm inside it, and I didn't have that fear that perhaps people who have been here their whole lives know. We're a small place. Everyone knows everybody. If you step out of line, you're going to be smeared as a racist or a Islamophobe or whatever it is that they were going to call you. When being called a white supremacist is not a nice thing.
No, it's horrible, and it's so easy to do it, and
But it
have
has
that
no
shit
basis
stick
in
to your
truth
fur.
at all.
Yeah. Well, it's one that once it's cast around, I think people, it really sticks. And how do you go? But no, I'm not. And you go, see, now you're a white supremacist in denial.
But it's also the power of words and language. Like we talk about spelling casting a spell.
Yeah.
And so that was used to good effect to roll out the agenda.
Yep.
But you also made a really good point, is that the way I see it is everything is connected. And if you look at the big picture, it's all pre-planned. So if you can kind of get a grasp on that it's all connected and it's planned, and that it's been, there's an agenda at play. If you can just...
And there's a pathway of events that are unfolding.
Yep.
Then it's not something that sort of just appears out of nowhere and that's just life. No, it was orchestrated events that are playing out to, for whatever reason. But I feel that more and more people are waking up to that.
Well, actually, on that topic of waking up, I mean, this is a bit woo-woo, Alistair, but I'm sure you accept me for who I am. And as nebulous as this might sound, I will repeat to Rob, because you've heard this in the past, but I remember a prediction from someone who I know makes great predictions, outlining New Zealand's response to the truth when it fully becomes out and open. And I think we will find, and I believe that her take on this was spot on, that New Zealand will feel culturally terrible for what they've done to themselves and to others around them when they find out the truth about what's behind this and what it's really like and the disastrous effects on health that it's going to have to people. I think we're going to go into a very dark place and really reconsider who we are as a nation, because there is so many people who righteously thought they were on the right path. When the penny drops, perhaps the reaction will be like that journalist. At first, there'll be a lot of denial, but then, it's going to be a case of the truth will set you free. But first of all, it's going to really piss you off. And I think we're going to go into a dark place over it. And there needs to be people like us as showers and way showers of light to go, it's okay, we can get through this. Let's just face up to the truth.
Now, what does that look like? A dark place?
It could look like, I wonder if it'll look like more protests from the average person. I wonder if it'll
like what's going on in France?
Yeah, potentially. I think it's going. I have this hallucination that more and more mainstream media will call people to do interviews, and the people who are being asked to do the interviews will say, "Who are you?" And they go, "We're TV1. We're TV." Sorry, you're just not relevant anymore.
No,
I don't have time for your sort of operation. I'm talking to free press people here. I'm talking to people who are running this themselves and who've organised stuff that's actually more meaningful and real.
I think that when you dive down and you spend so much time thinking about what happened in Wellington as I have, the more I've realised that, look at what happened on February the 10th when the police first tried to get rid of the protesters from the lawns of Parliament. And people like Chantel Baker were live streaming the whole day, and it literally caused thousands of people to up sticks and come to Wellington. And the media have just, they didn't see it coming. They're the dinosaurs who didn't know the meteor already hit,
Yeah.
And so when you look further into it and you realize the things that they did just didn't make any sense when there were literally thousands of cameras in there, and they're still trying to tell us that there was a really good example, right? One day, the police, they accused the protesters of throwing acid or something at them, and a video came out showing a policeman spraying pepper spray, and then another policeman walking from that direction holding his eyes. And, it's obvious what happened. It was friendly fire.
Yeah.
And the police, the police and the media just don't understand this, that we're now in a situation, we've got this thing called the internet, guys.
Yeah.
And the truth is going to come out because it's there for all of us to see. And they're still trying to hold on to this. In the old days, when I was a little kid, you'll remember it very well, there was like the New Zealand Herald for your newspaper, there was News Talk ZB for your radio, and there was TV1 for your TV. And they held on to those, and they were the gatekeepers of all the information that came in and out. You don't have that anymore. you get someone like Chantel turn up with a Facebook account and an iPhone, and she was reaching literally millions of people to tell them what was really going on. And so when you think about it, the point that I'm trying to get to is that this was not necessarily, we think that we were fighting for our freedom down there. I think that actually what it was they were fighting to keep control.
Oh, what a great perspective.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
they were.
Because
it's eroding all the
They're
time.
they're in their last death
throes,
of
that's right.
It's
It
crumbling.
is. The truth belongs to all of us now. And people like Edward Snowden and Julian Assange, they were the pioneers of this, showing us that no matter. And so a lot of people are very scared about the future and about privacy and all of that. But hey, we probably will have to give up a lot of privacy because it is a digital future and it is all there everywhere. But look at what's happening with Hunter Biden at the moment and Joe Biden. It all comes
who's
out.
leaving all that cocaine around the place? Honestly.
Where do you
But it
even
comes
begin?
out, right?
Yeah.
They would have just wiped it up in the past and no one would have heard about it. But we've got this thing called the internet now. The truth belongs to us all.
Yeah.
It's out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think what we actually end up with, and this may be a little bit far out, I don't know.
We like far out.
I think what the end result of all of this is that we're going to have a society which values truth much more, and it'll be a better place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Beautifully said.
Bombshell.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I just felt that the clean, the other ones that are afraid. Because if we power in numbers, right? If we stand up, we outnumber them billions to whatever. That's the point, and that's the thing. It's like, hang on a minute, you do realize we all have that power. If we just do what we did at the Freedom Village, right? Look at that impact. And the other ones that are afraid, the other ones that are hanging on for dear life.
The other ones that are grabbing evil, sonically directed energy weapons and firing them at people in the crowd.
Yeah.
What are they
That's-
so
That's
afraid of?
desperation.
That's
Yeah.
some dark shit.
What do we want? We want truth, freedom, we want unity, we want peace, we want love, core values. What are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We just want to fire sonic weapons at you.
Yeah. So,
You'd mentioned about people power, right? That protest, there was one great story which I absolutely love, which just shows what people power can do, which I'd love to tell you guys.
Please do,
So,
yeah.
on that February the 10th, when the police came in and they dragged away a whole lot of people, and I believe they arrested around 120 people, and you saw 7 of those in the film.
Yep.
We call them the Arahata 7.
7's
Because they
a
were-
spiritual number.
It is apparently,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it's a, yeah.
Yeah,
I
it
didn't
is.
know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And so basically what happened was 120 people all in the police cells, and then suddenly you've got they're all divided into men and women, and of course that's the police's biggest mistake, because you don't put a whole lot of women together in a room and expect them not to talk.
Yeah.
And so what happened was, one by one, these people, they all signed their bail conditions and they left. I've got a dog in the car. I've got a kid to look after. I've got a husband waiting for me.
Right.
Whatever. One by one, they all left. They signed their bail conditions, which were, remember, these are bail conditions saying you have to go back to your hometown and you can't come back to Wellington.
Right.
You can't be within 500 metres of Parliament, stuff like that.
Right.
So then suddenly there's only 7 of them left. Those are the 7 that you see in part 2 of We Came Here for Freedom. And they decided, nah, we're going to keep the fight going inside. How do we keep it going inside? And so their idea was, we're not going to sign the bail conditions and we're just going to clog up the system. And of course, it gets to, that was the Thursday was when they were arrested. By the Friday night, they got to do something with them. They can't keep them in the holding cells. This is the busy time about to occur, right?
Yeah.
So they send them off to Arahata prison. They get into Arahata prison, and this is another mistake they made, because now they want to test them for the virus, and they say, no, we don't do that. And so they have to put them into 7 separate cells. These are 7
Brilliant.
separate cells which are supposed to be for real criminals. And then how do you stick together?
Yeah, you're
Right.
separated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what they did was they lay on the floor, and there's apparently, from what I understand, there were these little slits at the bottom of each door of all these cells, where
Right.
they would put the meal trays through, right?
Right.
And so they would lie on the floor and sing to each other. You can stick your vaccine
Right.
mandate up
Yeah.
your
Yeah,
ass.
yeah, yeah.
Apparently they sang it so much, and they came up with all sorts of different verses.
Sure.
That's what you see in We
Yeah.
Came Here for Freedom when
Yeah.
she's singing all those verses, right? And apparently they sang them so much that the other prisoners started to get a little bit annoyed at them and started shouting out threats to them and all of that. But I love this story because what happened in the end was after the weekend was over, they basically threw them out on the streets, no bail conditions. What that meant is every other of those 120 other protesters now had to have their bail conditions wiped because they all have to have the same, and they can all go back to the protest. And when you think about that, you think about how these women, at their least powerful, found a way to be their most powerful.
Yeah.
Wow.
It just blows me away that's the people power. We have to remember what we learnt down there, and that was probably my biggest takeaway.
That's amazing.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah,
They're
that was very
separated in
moving.
different cells, and they still figure out a way of doing it.
One of the things that we're seeing now is more and more people are wanting to watch this film, right? More than you originally thought as it's growing. And one of the things that upset me was was managing my own emotions, sitting in the theatre, seeing this protester have his eye gouged viciously by a police officer.
Yeah.
And thinking now about how I've heard from some people who apparently listen to the news, and because I don't anymore, that they're going to give commendations and awards to those police officers that were involved in
Wow,
that
really?
that act. Apparently, there is sort of participation awards for those cops for attending and doing a good job type things. Perhaps they'll get a roll out of a gold star that they can proudly pin to their jacket. So this sort of stuff's going on, and you think, what an injustice. But you know what? More and more people are watching the film. More and more people are seeing this guy with his massive frame and his skinhead, and he was just a giant brute of a guy, just smashing the shit out of people in the most unprofessional way.
Yep.
So what pleases me about that is more and more people will see him.
Yep.
Because how do you live with yourself? How do you stand up and be, I'm a proud cop, knowing that the shit you did is exposed to everyone?
It's there forever now, though.
Yeah.
It's there forever now. And every time we show the film, and I generally sit at the back of wherever we are, the theatre or the hall, and when that scene comes up, it's an audible gasp.
Yeah.
And these are people generally who knew it happened,
Yeah.
and yet they still, it's like, oh no, that's you can't get away from that. But if you look through the Independent Police Conduct Authority report, that incident got 3 words: an acknowledgement that it happened, but otherwise, that's a different investigation. And when Phil came along to our screening, he said nothing's happened. It's all being sort of pushed under the carpet. But it's the court of public opinion. It's the court of history, and that really counts. Those medals that you're talking about, they'd be pretty hollow.
Yeah.
Once.
I don't know what their commendations are. I might have overblown my description of it. I didn't read the news personally. But even if it's like, hey, well done, and here's your bonus this year, it's just shocking.
Well, that'll last them for this Christmas. But that scene, that guy is on film forever now.
Yeah.
Sorry, but his bonus for this Christmas is short-lived compared to that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what drives I think a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, or a storyteller of any type, to tell these stories, is to make sure that they aren't forgotten. And you hope that it'll last long enough for people to be able to see it, and with the heat taken out over time, that people will be able to see it in the cold light of day and say, that was that was dead cert wrong.
Yeah, and perhaps someone will be able to identify them too, because naturally enough, all of their police numbers and identification were obscured, weren't they?
One of the people that got injured, Jeanette Wilson, she got her sternum broken on the first Thursday, the 10th, and she's been really fighting for justice on that.
Yeah.
But it's got to the point where they said, oh, yeah, we acknowledge it happened, but we can't identify the police officer because they're wearing a mask.
Conveniently.
Convenient, yeah. In the case of the guy with the eye gouging, it was Phil, right?
Yeah.
Well, there was no mask there, was there?
To be honest with you, I've watched that scene about 1 billion times, but I can't actually because you see from the back of his head mostly, don't you? I would expect that he was wearing a mask because they were all wearing masks the whole entire time. That was the scariest thing about them. I always remember, that sequence of 3:45 a.m. on the 20th of February when they came in and put the blocks in.
Yeah.
That was the first time that I really realized I was looking into the eyes of the police state, because that was the first time. Before that, they were talking to us. You'd ask them a question and they'd say, oh, I don't know, ask my officer in charge or whatever. But that day, they decided no more talking, and it was frightening because they were wearing those masks, and all you had were these blank stares coming back at you.
Yeah. It reminds me of a podcast that I listened to, which I can't remember because I listened to so many, but they had this analogy of like the stormtroopers in Empire, right?
Right.
And the police are like the stormtroopers, they're expressionless, designed there they're just following orders. They're just doing their jobs, which disconnects the humanity aspect.
Yeah.
But I like to think that these are, because we know they are, out of their uniform, they're individuals with their passions, beliefs, etc. And you'd like to think that they would have a consciousness and can look back and even admit that, I'm human, I'm fallible, I was just trying to do my job. But that's something that they have to reconcile for themselves.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there are plenty of people in positions of power that have taken a hard look in the mirror and gone, I'm not proud of what I did that day, but, we all make mistakes, and moving forward, if it's changed them in some way or helped them to shift their perspective or evolve them in some respect, then I think that's a good thing.
We can only hope.
Yeah, if they become a better person for it.
I hope so.
Yeah.
That's what we hope for.
That's what we hope moving forward, I guess.
Yeah.
You'd hope so. I remember actually just recently, Sue Gray had her tribunal, her case come up about her misconduct hearing.
Right.
And I was talking to her the other day, and she said that towards the end, it got so obvious that her points were hitting home to the judges.
Really?
There were 5 judges. And she thought initially that maybe they were... I can't talk for her.
Sure.
But my impression was that it felt a little bit hostile to begin with. Like it may have been stacked against her. But by the end of the hearing, the prosecution lawyer had absolutely nothing, and they were seeing through it. And to the point where one of the judges said the prosecution lawyer was saying something about how she didn't need to do this, that way. All that did was, talking about these things, it just created more fear and so on. And the judge actually gave an example and said, well, it's kind of like a restaurant. If there's food poisoning, people need to be able to talk about it, so we find out what happened. And so people are aware that this could happen at that restaurant. And then she said none of it would have been necessary if the media had just done their job.
Yeah.
This is what a judge was saying. I think that they're starting to realize that they weren't being told the whole story. A lot of those people, they have invested their entire lives in the system, and so they just believed what the system was telling them. And so I think now when you hear stories like that, you realize they're actually opening their eyes and saying, oh, okay, now I get it. And that's just a matter of time.
This idea of the media doing their job's really fascinating, because surely their job, which is paid for almost entirely by private monies, in fact they are doing
Public
their job.
money.
Well, then there's the
By the
public money
government,
side
yeah.
of it too. I suppose if you believe that the government has got your best interests at heart, then that money should be given to fair and equitable reporting.
You know, that just to finish off that story with Sue's hearing,
Yeah.
there was a stuff journalist there, and the guy sitting next to him, also he's one of us, or on the freedom side,
Right.
and he wrote a story about a wonderful story by Mike B. It's on Counterspin. I really recommend it. It's a really good take on it. He's a very level-headed man, and they were sitting next to each other, him and the stuff journalist.
Right.
And when the judge said that about if the media had just done the job, Mike was nudging him, saying, "You hear that? That's what I've just been saying to you." And the stuff guy said before he left, apparently, this is what I heard.
Yeah.
Was he said, "Well, I won't call her a prominent anti-vax lawyer anymore. I'll just call her a prominent lawyer." You go have a look.
That's
You
nice.
go have a look at the stuff story, and that's exactly what he did.
Wow.
Good on
That's
him.
a win.
That's a win.
That's
That's a win.
a subtle, well, it's a significant change, just a softening of approach,
Well,
isn't it?
He would have been surrounded by Sue Gray's supporters in the gallery and so on.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think they're starting to realise now that you can sort of feel the change in the air. I think they are starting to realise that they may have gone a bit far, and they've seen themselves in the mirror through things like We Came Here for Freedom or Sam Blanchard's Silenced movie. They'll see it again with River of Freedom when that comes
Sorry
out.
about that. Let's close that window.
Yeah.
Looks like it's recycling day.
Yeah, they're starting
Yeah.
to see, I think.
They are. Is there something behind all this that you believe is going on that is driving the strange stuff that we're seeing in the world? Or is that a rabbit hole that isn't worth pursuing because ultimately it degrades from the effect and the power that this movie has?
I think that the answer is what I said before. I think, yes, you can draw all sorts of lines between things and say, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
But I think personally that what drove all of that for those 3 years was pure greed, and greed is immediate. Greed needs is thirsty now. And so I think that's what drove that part of things.
Wow.
But what is driving things if you've got to think about it on a bigger level, because it's not just happening with the pharmaceutical industry, it's happening in all sorts of walks of life. And I come back to that idea about we weren't fighting for our freedom, they were fighting to keep control.
Yeah.
I think that's what is actually driving it. You see it in and I think there's a bit of a grab going on as well. When you look at things like the therapeutics products bill,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that's the pharmaceutical industry doing a grab. I've heard recent things about the solar energy industry. You look out for that in the future. There's BlackRock has actually bought a big company here in New Zealand, which is the biggest provider for solar energy in New Zealand.
Is that Harrison's?
Solar Zero.
Solar Zero, okay.
If you look that up on the internet, you'll see that it's going through the Overseas Investment Office processes at the moment. I mean, to me, I just think it's greed, and I don't know. You can have all sorts, but of course, I don't know as well.
They know what's coming, don't they? If you connect the dots on the BlackRock purchase of a solar company, the inference might be that we will have other forms of energy taken away from us, and then that becomes the most valuable one, right?
Right.
Like petrol, diesel.
You could easily see the government saying, "Okay, everybody, we need you all to go onto solar energy to cut our carbon footprint.
Yeah.
We'll subsidize everybody having it." And then suddenly you got everybody, and then suddenly we've got a foreign power owning our
Hydro stations.
our community power grid.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a national security issue right there.
big time.
But I mean, look, I don't know. I don't think any of us know. All we can do is just, but we do need to learn how to stand up together, because when push does eventually come to shove, we're going to need to be together. We're going to need to know how to be together.
Yeah.
That's true.
In retrospect, I see the event, the madness, was a huge litmus test to see where humanity was at on a collective level, because it was obviously a worldwide thing, which, in my lifetime, hasn't happened. And it was, and this whole power grab is a desperation of what you want to call it, empire, losing control, the powers that be, whatever it is, whatever your belief is surrounding it. There's enough information out there if you're open to it and you research it, and it's being exposed more and more. But it's interesting how reality has shifted and will continue to shift, and just what's happening on all those levels. And I suppose you can only meet other people at what level they're at. And
good point.
Yeah. And how open you are. And I truly, I know that your documentary has a momentum now and is out there in the collective. And the most powerful thing, I still believe, is word of mouth. Obviously, there's social media, but just by having the conversation and talking about it, it's going to help spread ultimately what your film is about.
Well, and
to the people that maybe weren't open to your version or what really happened, because it's easy to preach to the choir, right?
Yeah, so easy.
Yeah. That's an easy, but it's actually spreading that message further, or at least, and by not by force, but when people are genuinely curious and guided and wanting to do that on their own free will.
I'm very much hoping that to do that the film, I try and not preach with the film.
Yeah.
I try and not have a narrator saying, this is what happened, and then this is what happened, and then this is what happened. It's more just the memories of the people. And when you hear it, you hear the voices of all these different people, and you see all these faces. That was a very deliberate thing. I didn't necessarily, first of all, I didn't want people.
That was superbly done, by the way.
Yeah?
Yeah, dude.
Thank you.
Please keep that smile on your face. You deserve it. As a big fan of film, that was so well done.
You know what it did?
You can make all those decisions for yourself. Sorry, Rob.
But obviously that's a creative choice that you use beautifully. But what I felt is it gave you a sense of being there, but it's made it personal.
Yeah.
It didn't make me feel separate from these people.
When I mean, it was actually a big choice, because it's not what everybody does. You're going out on a limb a little bit, and because you're doing something a little bit different. But I don't see the point in doing it the same as everybody else all the time anyway. That's not how we move forward. So, but what I found was exactly that. When you hear a voice, that person's inside your head. You're imagining who they are and so on. And when you see those pictures of all those people, everybody's picking out, it could be that person, it could be that person. But it's a very intimate way of telling the story. That was the word,
intimate,
right?
Yeah.
So, and sometimes you do see the person who's talking at the same time as you're hearing them, but you wouldn't know. I know, because that's where I put them. But I mean, that it's those the whole point of it was because those voices have been silenced. So now what I'd like to think is that the way doing it like that, it does it in such a way that it's not too confrontational, so that those people who may have been on the other side of the fence can at least go, okay, I'll listen to these people and I can make up my own mind. I think the images and the story is strong enough for somebody. If they don't have any empathy after seeing that, I think they're lost anyway.
So
because it's
well said. Yeah, I agree.
It's pretty.
That goes back to that first question. What would you stand up for?
Yeah.
If you don't have empathy for what happened here to these people, you're lost, because any of this sort of stuff could happen to you. If you believe something strongly and you're suppressed from your right to protest, to even have a government representative even talk to you, to be beaten up by police with no identification badge numbers on, where do you have anything important in your life that you actually believe in, or are you just an NPC character taking your jabs and walking around doing what you're told?
What are you going to leave behind for your kids, your grandkids? At what point are you going to say something? Because I think everyone must have that line, surely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
People were so moved at the showing that I attended that further down our row, a family stood up and gave a rather inspiring haka.
Yeah, that was
And
powerful.
Rob,
Yeah.
you were visibly moved.
I was
by
moved.
It.
I actually, it brought me to tears
Yeah.
because I felt the emotion. It was not a logical, this is right. It was just purely connected to heart. That's what I felt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was pretty close to that myself because it was just.
It was raw.
But-
it was real.
But I stood there and I was listening to it, and I thought, no, I'm gonna take power out of this. And I tell you, I stand taller after hearing that or having that experience.
Yeah.
It was incredibly powerful.
It was so, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. Because it was
Probably better than any award that I've ever received. It was just you live with that for the rest of your life, knowing, okay, I moved a group of people to express themselves in such a way. And that theatre, it was, I'll never forget the sound of it with the ladies getting in on
I know,
2A.
right?
It was incredible.
It was incredible.
Even on that night, there was someone who came up and stood there, and she had difficulty talking because she was a very, very shy person.
Yes.
And you moved her and changed her life as well, I believe. Rob, I think it might be time to wrap things up. Do you have any final questions or things to ask? And we'll put it to Alistair.
No, it's just been a real pleasure chatting to you, Alistair. Yeah. Thank you so
really
much for
enjoyable
being
doing
here
this.
and for sharing, your insights. I learn something all the time.
I did have what I thought was a really clever question for you, but then you bloody went and talked about it.
Probably answered it. Yeah. Well, that happens a lot.
Well, I was sitting, because, when you come along to these showings that of the tour where it's being played in private venues and public halls and scout halls or wherever it is, right, in little theatres, then you get an opportunity to ask the director, because you go along to, I guess, most of them where you can. Yep. And my clever filmy type question was, well, Alistair, what was on the cutting room floor that you wish you could have showed? But I think you actually did speak to that earlier. Yeah. Is there something that was, okay, I'll give you the question. Is there something that was forming in your mind in the edit suite? You're like, here's a story, I've got some footage of this, but it wasn't quite full enough to show?
I think the only thing that I regret a little bit is that not having that story that I mentioned about Lisa Wellborn's story, because I think that does show another side to the whole argument, to the whole discussion, that would do very well to be told, because at the end of the day, this government that we have did a massive number. They spent billions of dollars. Literally, they spent billions of dollars on brainwashing and propagandizing.
Lisa's the one who came down in tears thinking she was going to...
The one that was talking about the lady who thought she was going to die.
Yeah. Because she'd been double vaxxed and masked, and she went to the tent at the...
So I wish that I'd been able to put that story in, and that's a small regret that I have. But I also do remember trying to put it in, and just the rhythm of the story at that point, it didn't really work.
Right.
But I think that a lot of that film was made by there were bigger hands at work. I remember before we went with the convoy, there was a protest on December 16th the year before, and we went down to Wellington, and I reckon there were 20,000 people there that day. It was massive. Wow. And I made a short film about that, and I'm really proud of that little one, actually. It's about 10, 12 minutes or something. And when I made it, it just felt like we are in an ocean, and the currents and the winds are just pushing us this way and that, and there are waves at some points, and there are, and I felt like that's what I went down to Wellington to try and show.
Yeah.
This this constant state of flux that we were in. And I think I was able to capture that. I think that I was able to. I guess it's up to other people to decide that. But it was just meant to be made, and it was probably the easiest thing that I've ever made, because you looked at what you had. You can't show absolutely everything. You can only show what you've got. And it just seemed to come together. One thing that I really love about
that
this
feeling.
film.
That's so good.
One thing I love about this film, and I like to claim that this is how I did it deliberately,
Yeah.
but this is why I say the bigger
Right.
hands at work.
I get it.
If you watch that part 2 of the film, it starts in what could be the morning. It goes through to the afternoon. You see the people on stage, and you see this was a deliberate thing. I showed how that stage was built without having somebody say, then we built a stage. You actually see the stage being built as the speeches and the songs and all of that are happening.
Yeah.
And so then finally you get to the end of that bit where the Arahara 7 are on the stage, whereas before, while Coral was singing, you're seeing people building the stage.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't know if you noticed that. So then that goes into a bigger thing, which is it looks like it starts in the morning, it goes through into the afternoon, and then after the nurse has spoken, lovely Kirsten, it goes into the night.
Yeah.
And then it starts again in the morning, into the afternoon, into the night, and then there's the final day. So it's kind of like a flow over
That's
a
fantastic.
3-day.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. It's natural. It's organic.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about that, but I'm watching it again tonight, so I'm going to
I
really
think that's
pick up
why
on
it has
that.
that flow,
Yeah.
because of that structure.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
It does.
But
Well,
it's,
it felt organic anyway, without you actually explaining the fact.
I think that's why
Yeah.
it has it, because it's got that structure. But
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I like to say that it was entirely me, but I realised it sort of 3/4 of the way through. Oh, look, I'm being helped here.
Yeah.
Your little creative antennas.
Yeah.
We're getting some
Brilliant,
advice. That's
brilliant.
great, man. What a lovely guest to have you on, because, you know, Rob and I have a history in the arts and creative fields, and to have you here means, I think, probably a lot more to us than it might be to other people who just want to talk to you about the subject of your film. So thanks. It's multi-dimensional for me.
And if people want to check out the film, of course,
Please give
Go
us the
to-
details.
We came
Came
here
here-
for freedom.com.
that's the one.
You can
Yeah.
watch it for free there.
And what if people want to do what they're seeing in the community, where you're able to attend and do the Q&A afterwards, because so many people have questions for you and things to talk about?
Yeah, there's a email contact form at the bottom of the website. You can just email me there. I pick up those directly myself, and just introduce yourself and say where you're from, and we can see whether we can arrange one. At the
fantastic.
moment, we're organising a few dates down in the South Island for the end of August, with doing it together with Sam Blanchard with her film Silenced. So that's going to be pretty cool. We did it together with her in Christchurch, and it worked very, very well. And when you think about it, those two films are both about about New Zealanders being silenced. And I think the way that she presents it is a completely different way to mine, but it is so needed, because that's how those people on the other side have always consumed their information. And so she's giving it to them that way. And it also has Peter Williams in it, who's a trusted voice in New Zealand, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to seeing that
Yeah,
film too.
I'd love to check that out.
Well, on that note, folks, thanks for putting up with my croaky voice today and all that it entails. It's been great having you here. You'll get to hear our exit tune. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Cheers.